Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage our next presenter, Mr. Steve Donziger. He is the founder and a lawyer at Donziger & Associates, doing incredible work around human rights and environmentalism. I think you'll find his talk fascinating. Please welcome Steve to the stage.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I came all the way from New York, and I'm going to speak just a few minutes about what I believe is a really interesting story about how capital, specifically investment capital, can be used in the service of human rights and in the service of reducing global warming. I'm an advocate, a human rights and environmental advocate. I got out of law school in 1993 in the same class as Barack Obama. And while he launched a political career, I went down to Ecuador, South America, where a friend of mine had told me about what he believed was one of the worst environmental disasters ever to afflict the world. And in a nutshell, I traveled there in April of 1993, over 25 years ago, and saw hundreds of open-air toxic waste pits in the Amazon rainforest, in an area where indigenous groups have been living for millennia and were reliant on natural water sources, rivers, streams, and groundwater for their drinking water, for their sustenance, for fishing and bathing. And this entire area, which was about 1,500 square miles, had been poisoned by the oil production practices of a company from my country. At the time it was Texaco, now Chevron, because Chevron bought Texaco in 2001. And when you meet people who live in these areas as a human rights advocate, to me, the only effective way to get a remedy is through the courts and the law. And I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about lawyers and about the law. I've always tried to take my legal skill and use it for the benefit of people. The only way, as we conceptualize how to help these people as lawyers, that we thought we could sustain a case against a big American oil company with lots of money. For example, Chevron often will have gross revenues of $200 or $250 billion a year, and the people affected have no money. They've never aspired to have money, and historically their lifestyles didn't require money because they had all the things they needed to eat and to build shelter and to take medicines in the rainforest itself. So we knew if we launched this battle, we could never sustain it without a sufficient amount of investment capital. So what we decided to do is try to build a model that I think is paradigm shifting in terms of how to take capital and help people like this. And we began to raise money. But what were we selling? We were selling portions of the legal claim. As an investor, people would look at this legal claim, assess it, try to determine the risk. Obviously, the defendant has a lot of money, deep pockets. And if there were to be a victory, it would be, in theory, easy to collect money. And the scale of the problem was enormous. You might remember the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in the United States in 2010. BP has paid out $50 billion in fines and compensation for that spill. And we thought this was much worse than that based on what experts were telling us. So in the end of the day, we were able to raise several $million. The money was used to hire a legal team, and over time, that money we raised, it ended up being about $30 million up to now, produced an asset worth $12 billion. Because the communities in Ecuador, the indigenous communities, and there's some farmer communities, ended up fighting for 8 years in Ecuadorian courts, and they won their case, which was affirmed by Ecuador's Constitutional Court just last July in an 8-0 decision. Now, how do we do it? I know a lot of folks out there think about investing and how to make the world a better place. The sweet spot of this model is you can do good and do well as an investor. And what I do is I help my clients in Ecuador who aren't sophisticated in a traditional sense, although they are highly sophisticated when it comes to surviving in the world and in the rainforest and in terms of their traditions. What I do is I marry their needs, or try to, with sophisticated capital in places like New York, London, Brussels, and wherever we're able to raise money. And just to give you a sense of the economics, and by the way, this is all public information for reasons I'll explain at some point, but the economics are, the latest round we did is we sold 1/8 of a point in a $12 billion claim for $250,000. So the numbers for an investor can be very attractive, because if you think about a full collection on that claim, you're looking at 40 or 50 times money. But why are those numbers so high for investors? It's obviously because of the risk, in the sense that if it doesn't work out, the investor loses all of his or her money. There's no recourse. So there is a fair amount of risk, and also the fact that Chevron has spent, if you can believe it, we estimate $3 billion to hire 60 law firms and use 2,000 lawyers to fight us. And that includes suing me personally back in the United States for $60 billion. Just to understand that number, I got sued for the most amount of money of anyone in United States history by Chevron in a US court. In my view, it was a form of retaliation for the work I had done helping my clients in Ecuador, and the lawsuit had no legal basis and has a whole host of problems. But the larger issue is companies like Chevron, if they feel threatened, and I think they feel really threatened by this case, because I think it challenges the paradigm of drilling for oil in the third world, or the so-called developing world, they will fight really hard to avoid paying. The oil industry, I think, is the next frontier in litigation in the United States. You might remember big tobacco, how, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, the tobacco industry settled a bunch of claims for $250 billion, in theory changing the paradigm of the tobacco industry. But until that happened, the tobacco industry fought really hard. They sued lawyers. They put out what I believe was fake science. And we're seeing the same type of behavior now from the fossil fuel industry. And this type of thing is really important, because to sustain effective change in the industry, money needs to flow in, so people who really are the guardians of the world and the guardians of the natural world, which are the indigenous people in the rainforest, can access capital that can make a profound difference in how oil companies operate. And even though the collection hasn't happened, the case is now in Canada, where the Ecuadorians are trying to collect Chevron's assets in Canada. We already have a unanimous Supreme Court decision from Canada, from the Supreme Court of Canada, backing us, but the constant efforts to block the case are pretty intense. But ultimately, I believe the people of Ecuador will collect a significant amount of money to do the cleanup necessary, so we can save a lot of lives, save indigenous culture, help preserve the forest. And I think that connects up with the whole global warming issue, because we don't sort of create the proper incentive structure for the fossil fuel industry. You know, if we don't align the incentives in a way that the companies have to pay the full cost of their production, and they can't externalize it to the environment and to these very vulnerable people, until that happens, we're going to have a fossil fuel industry that's going to be over-incentivized to drill in sensitive ecosystems in places where they shouldn't drill, and that's not going to help the cause of reversing global warming. So in a nutshell, I know I have very limited time, but that's the story, and I think Melissa's going to come out and maybe ask me questions or open it up for questions. But I guess I lost Melissa. In any event, are there any questions about this model, or anybody have any questions?
What will be the one after the oil industry?
I think the food industry. I mean, there's a whole, it's complicated because the world, in the United States, by the way, I mean, obviously everybody's aware of our rather destabilized political situation right now in the United States, but what the government of the United States has done more than anything, I mean, people sort of see the entertainment aspect of Donald Trump, but what's really happened is he has defanged government regulation almost completely in the United States, in the environment, food, all sorts of areas. And our legal system allows lawyers to file class action lawsuits and sort of become the regulators that the government doing the work the government regulators should be doing. So if you go to like Canada or England, France, most other countries, governments are a lot stronger at protecting their citizens from corporate abuse. And in the United States, a lot of that work falls to plaintiffs' lawyers. In the tobacco litigation, you literally had lawyers making huge legal fees for bringing the tobacco companies to their knees. Now, you get a lot of criticism. Why are lawyers making so much money? Lawyers are greedy. And a lot of those criticisms are true, and I'm sort of no fan of certain aspects of the legal profession, and I consider myself somewhat of a disruptor, to not only, the sort of the expectations of the oil industry, but also my own profession. So, but the U.S. legal system, combined with sort of problems we have in our political system, creates opportunities for this type of work and for this type of investment. And, this is admittedly, like say some of you have lots of investments. And this is obviously an exotic investment. But the advantage of this kind of investment is even if you lose, even if you don't collect, you are helping the cause of accountability because the process of doing the case is changing how the oil industry thinks about its work in the rainforest. So, we think we have a really good story to tell, and it's a model that we want to expand into other areas. There's a huge amount of resistance politically in the United States to plaintiffs' lawyers. That's what lawyers like myself are called because of the effectiveness of our work. But the work has to go on because I think the world has no choice, really.
Steve?
Oh, did I go on too long?
That's okay. That's okay. No, nothing's too long. I've got two questions from two young entrepreneurs who are going to join me on stage right now. I'd like to introduce Francesco Baldassarre and Valeria Cagnina. They're co-founders of Make, Play, Learn.
Hi.
Hi, all.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi. So, question for us?
Go ahead.
We are Valeria and Francesco, and we have a robotic company, and we are 17 and 25.
I'm old. I have the beard. So.
And we teach robotic in a fun and creative way from young children of 3 years old to teens, but also adult manager, and we want to change how people interact with education, because you can learn in a fun way and you can play by having fun every time you can learn.
Yeah, we think that soft skills are more important than technical skills.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because in this era of technology, where technology seems to be our God, we don't have to. We have to remember that human is important, and technical skill could be learned simpler, but soft skills, leadership, team working, problem solving, these are the skills that really count in this era, and we try to teach these skills to all the people that come to our courses. So from 3 years old to 99, because we think that it's never soon or late to learn. So that's our mission, trying to giving the possibility to the major people in the world to learn in a funny way, because learn is not a problem. Learn is good, and learn have to be fun, because fun is fundamental to for life and for us.
Let's get your questions in.
Yeah?
Yeah. You have a question for Steve? Yeah.
I can comment on what you... Yeah.
We are not prepared for this, okay?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just say this about what you do. You know, the whole issue, and this sort of relates to the nature of this conference, technology and stuff. You know, when I started in the early 1990s working with people in Ecuador, to communicate to people in the rainforest from New York, where I live, was not easy. Like, you'd have to set up a conference call with AT&T, which had a semi-monopoly back then, and pay about $200 to talk to your clients. Whereas now I can just take my phone out and dial my clients in the jungle, the Amazon jungle, and have any conversation I want pretty clearly for free. Okay, so technology has lowered the cost of people in my position who don't have a huge amount of resources to help people who have no money, okay? The other thing I want to say is understanding how the human dimension of life is so important. I mean, think about this. You know, I went to Harvard Law School and I was trained to, you know, it's like Cambridge or Oxford, like you're trained to run the world. And when I first started going down to Ecuador, I would tell my clients what to do. And I felt like I knew better. And over time, I realized that not only did I not know better, but I had a ton to learn from people who had zero formal education as we in the West understand education. But the wisdom of these people is astounding. And over time, we learn from each other and work together in a cohesive team. And I can say, as an American dude from New York, it's so enriching, the experience of working with people from a different, really radically different culture, background, paradigmatic worldview that like relates to the land and to nature when I live in the most concrete jungle imaginable in Manhattan. You know, I live in a 7th floor of an apartment. And I look out the window and I see another building right over there. That's what I look at. And they're living in the jungle. And it's a totally different world. But we managed to bring that all together. And I think without the human touch, without understanding leadership, without understanding cultural differences, without respecting those differences, learning from them, and learning humility, which I've tried to do. Not everyone I work with agrees, but you know, learning humility is really, really important. So I salute you. I think your work is really important.
Thank you so much.